With Call of Duty Next and the Black Ops 7 beta all wrapped up, there has now been plenty of time for players to digest how they are feeling towards the upcoming installment in the Call of Duty franchise. Fans were given a little over a week to see how the game played by creators, as well as getting hands-on time with both multiplayer and zombies themselves. But after the constant barrage of issues with the COD franchise over the last half-decade, Black Ops 7's success largely hinges on one singular question: can Treyarch be trusted? And well, the short answer is not quite yet. But I have to admit that there is a huge caveat here, which is the entire purpose behind making this video. Because if I am being honest, I quite enjoyed the beta, finding both the multiplayer and zombies to be pretty damn fun. Then why am I so reluctant to believe in Treyarch this time around when it comes to BO7? Well, the last few instances of Treyarch titles, zombies in particular, have been void of what makes them special, as radical changes in the direction of universal gameplay mechanics, armor, rarity, and Warzone-esque loadout systems plague what was once an immersive experience that led players to discover secrets inside of a unique survival environment. And even though there are things inside of this beta that I found rather enjoyable, Call of Duty and Treyarch have continued to make promise after promise that are either unkept or misrepresented with some sort of data manipulation or wordplay.
Every map will have its own unique wonder weapon.
You know what else is new? We got a brand new ammo mod coming to Black Ops 7 Zombies at launch.
We have fireworks returning from Black Ops 3. It's a brand new perk. Wisp Tea. What is that?
So Wisp Tea is you're trapped here, you need some friends, you need some allies wherever you can get them. And this perk is all about kind of gaining control of one.
Personally, I think we're all just really stoked about all the maps that we're going to come with. Everything just helps kind of tell the story and just pair all the maps themselves pair with the story we're trying to tell. So yeah, we're all really excited.
Thinking about how incredible some of the lines are, the writing's always on point.
Welcome to the party. Fuck. I gotta be honest. What you're saying to me makes me want to fight you a little.
This combined with the incredibly lame attempts at corporate events and video presentations, it just feels like the heart and soul has been sucked out of the game entirely. And even though Black Ops 6 was not fully to my liking, the fact that BO7 is right around the corner, I figured it was worth seeing what Treyarch was working on with the hopes of them fixing some of these core issues that players have been advocating for the last 5 years or so. And to my surprise, there are a few changes that have reignited some hope inside of my mind. And while I think it's evidently clear that COD Zombies will never be what it once was, the fact that Treyarch really seems to be trying to listen to our perceived grievances due to the assumed low presale numbers and the pressure from Battlefield 6, things could take an unexpected turn at any moment for the better, or I guess potentially for the worse. Before we dive into more of the concerns I have regarding Black Ops 7 Zombies as a whole, I think it's important to lay a bit of a foundation when it comes to what appears to be working with BO7, particularly within the confines of this beta. So initially when I dove into Van Dorn Farm, I was already wearing my skeptic glasses, and inside of my first playthrough, I pretty much felt apathetic. But as I kept loading into more and more matches, I started to really settle into some of the changes that were made mechanically. Things like the point, salvage, and loadout systems felt extremely restricted, which helped to encourage more tactful decision making. For example, and I'm sure you have heard this from other creators, but that need to focus on only one weapon, which is just your loadout weapon, it no longer felt like a priority since salvage was way less common and players are now encouraged to hit the mystery box or purchase a wall weapon. And since points were harder to come by, it makes deciding where you want to spend those points in the early game more impactful. Do you want to hit the box and hope to get a blue or purple random gun, or do you want to continue saving up with a weaker weapon to accrue salvage and spend more money on perks and the ammo crates? This stripping back of features is what makes Zombies have that survival flavor which has been missing for so many years at this point, which started all the way back inside of Black Ops 4. This change in economy is also great for not just the early round power curve that players begin journeying on, but it's also great for using gobblegum consumables. Because one of the biggest problems within Black Ops 6 Zombies was that Treyarch created so many redundancies within the core gameplay loop, from things like earning salvage in so many different ways to earning equipment in so many different ways, perks, weapon rarities, etc., that it wasn't really ever rare or special to use gobblegum to push past the limitations that core gameplay loop imposed upon upon the player. Everything that you ever needed was right there in front of you. But now within the beta, since players are more restricted when acquiring resources from zombies, consumables like Perkaholic, Dead Drop, Hidden Power, or even Wall Power, they actually have a place inside of the game, making you feel overpowered as opposed to just skipping Black Ops 6's blasé gameplay loop of inching your way towards being set up, which is a contradiction in of itself since that's what Modern Zombies' entire identity is built upon. And while the barrier on the resource economy was much more impactful inside of the gameplay than I initially thought it would be when I was reading Treyarch's blog post reveal, it wasn't the only thing that felt noticeably different, which was the limitations on augments and crafting table equipment. Now, I'm going to assume that this will be a somewhat controversial opinion, but I'm pretty mixed on the whole augment system as well as the crafting table. Because on one hand, I find unlocking bonuses for perks very satisfying, and being able to utilize a variety of different pieces of equipment in each map can be fun in the short term. But overall, I think these systems cause more harm than good because they are antithetical to creating unique experiences. And as time marches forward, augments and the equipment become very predictable in monotonous gameplay systems spanning across the entirety of the game. This entails that each map is going to end up playing nearly identically, and we'll circle back to that in a bit, but for now I want to focus on the impact that the lack of augments had inside of this beta. Because basically, my suspicions were all but confirmed, as usually when you're playing Cold War or BO6, the stacking of all of these second and third order abilities on your perks gradually lead to the player being way too overpowered. However, due to the removal of them in this beta, it had the reverse effect, causing feelings of vulnerability and struggle, which I really liked. And from this, a question bubbles up to the surface of my mind, which is, how does Treyarch handle the implementation and dispersal of survival maps throughout the year to allow them to feel distinct? And I think it's safe to assume that these survival experiences aren't going to be filled with deep side quests or any main quests or anything like that. So what is going to make Farm feel different from, let's say, Diner or Ashwood or wherever else they want to take players? And while this may seem like a minor inquiry, I would argue that this is a rather important one and that it needs to be figured out, as there is already a huge issue with the regular maps feeling unique inside of the Modern Zombies ecosystem, and so creating spaces without any specialized feature set baked in will simply over time get stale. But inside of the Van Dorn Farm beta, the lack of features made that map feel so much better and was one of the more standout experiences that I've had in Zombies in quite some time. However, since Modern Zombies developers and likely Activision have a deep fixation on catering to the non-Zombies players and quote-unquote casuals, I really do believe that each survival map will merely be a set dressing change or asset flip with all of the exact same mechanics on board. And I want to be clear, I don't think copying Black Ops 2's survival map restrictions is the way to go. Removing the pack-a-punch machine or perks or whatever is likely going too far simply due to how these zombies move and attack in this day and age. Or perhaps limiting augments on perks, or limiting items at the crafting table, tightening up salvage, or even increasing prices of things really could do a lot to make the maps feel distinct, as implementing systems to mess with the player could help with that variety. But I'm not one of the developers, so it's going to be up to them to figure that stuff out, and I would love to hear your ideas in the comments below if you have any of them. Another item I'd like to focus on is, of course, world building, which, if you've seen my videos before, you know how important I find things like narrative and art direction are, as well as how developers integrate those systems into the gameplay mechanics to create a synergistic sensation, elevating the game to a higher place. And the more and more I play video games and immerse myself in this culture, I find that since this market is so dense and oversaturated with regurgitated ideas from one developer to the next, it's quite clear just how many studios use similar mechanics over and over again, and developers often have a hard time differentiating themselves from one another. And a great way that they can do that, I would argue, is by having excellent world building and making it a large pillar on which that video game's identity rests. And a perfect example of this outside of Call of Duty is from a recent title called Expedition 33. And at this game's core, it focuses on turn-based combat with extensive RPG mechanics. However, the story and the world that those systems were settled in were absolutely marvelous. And the story was so moving that people are going to be talking about it for years to come. And to bring this back into COD, it's why games like Black Ops 3 are so memorable and core to fans' experience, because not only were the gameplay features super dialed in, but the worlds that Treyarch created and the stories they wanted to tell were so impactful that fans have been looking back fondly for quite some time, and they'll likely continue to do so for many more years to come. So what the hell does this have to do with Black Ops 7 Zombies? Well, so far, on what we've seen from Ashes of the Damned gameplay at Call of Duty Next, the trailers, Van Dorn Farm, and BO7 generally speaking, it feels like Treyarch is bringing back that fantastical, gritty, dark, and twisted artistic vision that has been missing from Call of Duty Zombies since 2020. The Dark Ether feels ominous for the first time ever as the atmosphere changes from area to area. Things almost feel like they defy the laws of nature as we know them and that anything is possible. The enemies are brutally designed, from the zombie model types to the Ravager and of course the Zursa Bear mini-boss. This combined with the eerie nature of the dead bodies hanging everywhere, the Van Dorn family sitting at the dinner table, the creepy song of the child singing from a blade trap as it annihilates zombies one after the next, all of these things help to build tension and friction for players. However, these types of ludonarrative elements can only stand scrutiny if the narrative stakes are actually high. And so while the atmosphere may feel good right now, it's simply because we don't know that much about the main story, meaning that a lot of Black Ops 7 largely hinges on Treyarch's writing, which has been absolutely abysmal since Jason Blundell and Craig Houston stopped leading these projects together in 2019, which is something we'll circle back to in just a little bit. The other bit about BO7's art direction I'm finding very enjoyable is the futuristic component, and I never realized until playing Farm just how much this improves my immersion into zombies. Black Ops 3 and 4 are my personal favorite entries into the COD Zombies franchise, and seeing guns like the Man of War, Rampart, Spitfire, ICR, and the KRM, etc., they're just more fun and interesting visually to see than a Kilo or XM4. I find the Cold War and BO6 era weapons to be so boring looking, feeling, and sounding, which is why I tend to gravitate more towards the fictional spins on these weapons, which I think gives Treyarch more freedom with not just making fun guns, but fun equipment, lethal, score streaks, and so on. And while a simple asset flip of something can be lazy at times, it really does help to bring players closer to this fictional world as opposed to just injecting realism into it because of whatever Warzone has recently been failing at doing. So before we talk about more of the concerns I have for Black Ops 7, I think a good pit stop would be to talk about the Cursed mode. I know there is a lot of hope from the community talking about how this mode will re-establish the classic Zombies framework and how there will be a bridge from directed mode to standard mode to Cursed mode, and we will finally unite in our zombies utopia of equality. But I gotta just let y'all know up front, I just don't buy any of this. Now, the core of this mode is apparently based upon locking a feature called relics, which allow players to mod their zombies experience to give them more of an old school feel. And I think based off of the limited information that we have right now, that there are essentially 3 potential outcomes for how this mode reflects Black Ops 7 Zombies and what it does inside of the community. The first outcome is that the Cursed mode will be much more similar to standard mode than fans want. The second outcome will be that it's too different from the standard mode. And the third outcome is that it's going to be great and everything will work out. So let's break each one of these down and keep in mind that these are all assumptions, so let's try to keep things respectful in the comment section. So like I said, the first outcome is that the Cursed mode will be similar to the standard and not the true differentiator that the hardcore fans want. And the reason that this may occur is because it's going to be very difficult to develop a core Zombies experience with multiple maps, boss fights, main quests, and reward systems in tandem with another variant of Zombies that is completely built upon classic mechanics. This means that they are going to keep things very similar and only allow players to alter pre-existing things in-game that players don't like, such as armor, loadouts, etc. And so if Treyarch really wants players to enjoy this, it will have to feel special and distinct from standard and be tuned for classic features. Otherwise, it's just going to feel identical, which is evidenced by what we saw in the recent developer talk video.
You're trying to find these relics, and each relic is this additional difficulty modifier. So you find that, you unlock it permanently, and you can activate relics and make the mode even harder. But by doing so, you'll also unlock additional rewards. And the first reward is once you hit kind of tier 1, is golden armor now becomes available in Cursed as a wall buy.
Will there be a relic to remove armor in Cursed? No. You really need armor to survive these high rounds. It's a harsh world out there. Without armor, you die pretty quickly. So we do have an augment for Vulture Aid that will automatically replay an armor piece for you when you pick it up. But also, there's golden armor, which you can get after you upgrade to 3 plates.
You're gonna need golden armor in Cursed. It's a really challenging mode. When you start stacking those relics at higher tiers, it's essential.
The golden armor relic is a perfect example of what I'm referring to here, as this means that there is still going to be armor inside of this mode. Also, the devs are saying in this clip that we need armor, which means that there's no significant change with however many hits it takes to go down, that you're still going to need to pick up armor plates, as well as replating still being a mechanic along with the automatic restoration of the golden armor vest. This is just a band-aid solution to the larger issue that old school Zombies players have with the modern mechanics, and it's quite frankly a red herring the way that they framed it, as it's a misrepresentation of the information put in front of the player to convince them that we actually need these mechanics and systems when that's not how this actually works. The second position here is, despite the lack of core changes, that Cursed mode will be too different from both standard and classic Zombies, which will end up causing more harm than good due to the track record of Treyarch constantly mismanaging their resources. Because let's be honest here, as much as I love Treyarch for everything that they have brought to us over the years, they have been notoriously terrible at supporting multiple modes. And it's not their fault. They only have so many people and resources to go around that it's literally impossible for them to give everything to fans and make them feel satisfied. And I could see Cursed mode being underdeveloped at launch and so different from standard that people aren't playing it as much as the core Zombies experience because of that lack of depth. Treyarch would then eventually stop supporting the Cursed mode, nor implement anything fun for it throughout the entire year because it would be a waste of time and money. This would then prove to Activision that Zombies fans hate the classic experience, and then the modern mechanics are never going to evolve. And a quick side point, it could also be the case that Treyarch would become spread so thin that both standard and Cursed mode suffer along with the life cycle of BO7 because they attempted to make things so different that they can't handle that content output. But I honestly can't see this being the case. And lastly, we have the final potential outcome, which is that everything works out wonderfully. But I only believe that this can happen if Activision gives Treyarch the time to bring this vision to fruition, and they don't treat it like the redheaded stepchild they seem to think classic Zombies is. And if they can incorporate challenges, rewards, secrets, and Easter eggs, all while making it feel distinct enough from the standard mode, it could be a fantastic concept for BO7, and I would absolutely love for that to be the case. However, I have been around the block many times with this COD cycle, and this is 100% one of those things where I will believe it when I see it. Alright, so we touched on some of the positive aspects of what I'm looking forward to, but before we dig into each of the points of criticism and concern regarding Black Ops 7 Zombies, I think a bit of context is warranted as to why myself and many players feel the way that they do towards this upcoming installment. Because a lot of the arguments and positions that people are holding are coming from a place of skepticism, and it's often hard to square these circles when you remember that Call of Duty is also a video games industry juggernaut that helped to define the live service FPS genre as we know it today, meaning that without Call of Duty, we wouldn't have a lot of these great things in gaming that we have grown accustomed to. That being said, it's also a corporate machine that has been around for over 2 decades with a very complicated and imperfect past, from mass waves of developers leaving and creating their own studios, to quite serious lawsuits in which odd behavior is associated, to the rampant misrepresentation of information with things like SBMM and predatory monetization practices. And if you've been around for any of these last 20 years, then you are well aware of the tension that has been brewing inside of the community and understand the damage that it has done to the reputation of not only Call of Duty as a brand, but to the developers, Activision Blizzard King, and now Microsoft and Xbox Gaming. It's almost like players and developers have been speaking past one another for nearly half a decade, while Activision sat in the background, continuously milking the franchise dry both emotionally and fiscally. And while the last 6 years in particular have been some of the most divisive of all of them, with Infinity Ward ushering in this modern era of Call of Duty, players truly hit a boiling point during Black Ops 6 as the fatigue began to reveal itself more clearly, and not just with multiplayer, but with Zombies, Campaign, and Warzone to boot. And when Black Ops 6 began to conclude its life cycle, I'll be the first to admit it, I was ready to let all of this go and move on from Call of Duty as both a pastime and content creation generally speaking. But since Black Ops 7 is being developed alongside BO6, allegedly at least, I figured let's just see what Treyarch has been doing behind the scenes, and to be honest, I am glad I chose to wait. But I still have many questions and concerns about BO7 Zombies, some of which that we can presume the answers to, and others that have yet to be addressed by Treyarch. But what's really tricky about discussing the current era of Zombies is that there isn't just one grievance you can hang your hat on, and even calling them grievances is somewhat poor framing because the modern framework of COD Zombies isn't inherently bad. But from my perspective, there are just a variety of changes that have stacked up over time that really hurt the replayability and longevity of these newer titles. So much so that I barely go back and play the more recent Zombies games simply because if you've tried one, you've really experienced them all. And this is because of the core fundamental gameplay systems that prop up this new era. Since the dawn of Cold Cold War Zombies, nothing has changed. It's the same equipment, the same armor, the same field upgrade system, and the same AATs. And while there are a few exceptions, that only proves the rule even more so. And what's even more frustrating about them is that these features are supported by unlockable skill trees that are just not that deep or interesting, which are just passively earned by playing the game. And while I know that there are those out there who seem to favor the augment system over previous ones, and fair enough, I guess, but it's really just the same concept with a few tweaks. And the end result is having these systems lead to no variety inside of the maps themselves, and all of that variation that is there is left inside of the menus outside of the game itself, which is fine for a little bit, but it becomes severely stale over time. And so when I see Treyarch post that they are adding even more augments to BO7, I instantly recoil because they had an opportunity to design specialty features inside of these new maps with bonus rewards for players playing on those specific maps. But instead, they contributed to the ever-growing pool of monotony. But here's the thing. I don't think having some sort of RPG skill tree to grind for is a net negative for the zombies mode as a whole. I think only having this one system be the primary source of buffs to be problematic, because it removes the idea of having specialty features inside of each map throughout the DLC lifecycle, therefore making each subsequent map that comes after it feel like just an environment change as opposed to a full experience. And the same goes with perks, the crafting table, loadouts, score streaks, and the rarity system. And from where I'm sitting, these ideas devalue Call of Duty Zombies because they are so vast and ever expanding. There are now so many redundancies and tools that players have access to and can acquire at any given moment. And when that happens, it puts way too much power in the player customization and removes the ability for Treyarch to create a tightly crafted experience for players to push through. And I will say it appears that a large section of the player base really does enjoy the ability to readily customize everything at a moment's notice, as players can now switch gun packs mid-match, and now we are seeing people even push for switching augments mid-match. And I think this is a terrible idea, as it removes any and all stakes and commitment made by the player when entering into their game. And I do understand I'm probably in the minority here, but I'm just trying to be honest with you guys about how I feel towards these customizable systems. Now, I want you to imagine something with me for a second. Pretend you're playing Call of the Dead and swapping out your gobblegum packs and your augments so that you could go from taking out George with the meta loadout and then going back to hoarding the undead and swapping between the two at your heart's content. And it sounds weird when you think about it, but there's a reason for this. And it's because the classic Zombies framework is in direct opposition to the unending player customization. And this is due to the depletion of Treyarch's ability to control particular variables that encourage players to become fully immersed in said experience, which is obviously something that modern Zombies struggles with. So what am I trying to say here? Well, in plain terms, the more customizable feature sets we have, the further we will be pushed away from the AAA Treyarch tailored Zombies experience that many fans are craving. And I can already see myself getting a lot of pushback for holding this position, but my argument hinges on the idea that the more fans inject their personal subjective preferences into the game, it devalues the specialized adventure Treyarch wants to take us on. And every time the developers add more to them, the further we get from that classic Zombies feel. Now, I am grateful for the refinements that Treyarch has added into BO7 Zombies for some of these systems, and while they seem to work on a micro level when they're stripped back in the beta, it's hard to tell how impactful the changes are when you have everything mixed together inside of the modern gameplay soup. Now that I know that these systems aren't leaving anytime soon, it's more so my hope that Treyarch figures out how to split the difference here and stops filling up the crafting table with every piece of equipment under the sun, stops adding more and more augments to the list, and begins to add in more unique in-map features and buildables so that each Zombies map feels distinct in terms of gameplay, feature sets, and each map's theme. Speaking of map themes, this is another area that worries me quite a bit. And while you might be thinking to yourself, hey, Alex, just a moment ago you were talking about how great the art direction was. What gives, buddy? Well, first of all, I'd say,
I'm not your buddy, friend.
And the second thing I would say is, what gives is that based on Treyarch's track record since Jason Blundell has left, is the commitment to interesting map locations, which have been very poor. And they're also mixed with this recycled concept of the Dark Ether. And so on one hand, seeing this iteration of the Dark Ether is very cool, as it's much more brooding and moody. But on the other hand, there has to be more to this world than just purple stuff. Treyarch has the ability to take us on such a brilliant adventure with no boundaries other than their imagination. And every year they bring out a new Zombies iteration, there is such big talk of the game going where no game has gone before to only take players from one boring location to the next. It has been 6 years of straight boring facility maps with no narrative depth or interesting art design, with maybe 1 or 2 standouts. And while Treyarch does appear to have made some drastic changes within BO7, I would be lying if I said I believe that they will stick with worth it throughout the year. However, there is a huge but, and this is where things get interesting, because in spring of 2025, Insider Gaming released an article leaking that Black Ops 7 Zombies was going to have a stacked DLC season with wild map locations from, and I quote, a map set in post-World War II New York where the Nazis have dropped a nuclear bomb, another map set in a Japanese temple at the foot of an erupting volcano, another one in Vietnam, Afghanistan, and then a space station inside of the Dark Ether. And at the time, I completely blew this off, as Treyarch has gone for a much more subdued zombies mode since the days of Cold War. But these leaks seem to line up with not only with what Treyarch has revealed to us so far with Ashes of the Damned, but the author at the time wrote that Call of Duty 2025 Zombies will have one of the biggest maps to date and have a similar transportation system to Transit. Not to mention, Treyarch and Activision are bringing back the classic Zombies crew of Richtofen, Nikolai, Dempsey, and Takio. And if we take a look at the origin points from the biographies of each of these characters, they match the locations from the leaks in this article, adding further credibility to all of this information. But these maps won't be fully realized if they don't have great quests, story, and boss fights, and after what the writers did within Black Ops 6, I am not really sure what to expect. The quests and narrative inside of BO6 were some of the worst experientially that we have ever received, and I know Milo has made this point before, but it's absolutely true, and that is that it feels as if various departments are not communicating with one another properly. The level design team, the art team, the writing team, and the gameplay team, or however they're organized, really need to sit down and make sure they're all on the same page, because each team seems to just do their own thing and throw it in the game, removing any and all meaning from whatever it is they're pushing onto the fans. In classic Zombies, nothing was done by accident, and things are now so formulaic with Zombies, and with Call of Duty as a whole, that the element of mystery and excitement erodes away slowly over time simply due to a lack of coordination on behalf of the developers. That being said, based on what we know so far about this new chapter in the Dark Ether, it does at least seem much more interesting, and having the main crew back does help, but I don't think it's going to make a huge difference if they're written poorly. And now the last thing I'd like to discuss with these Zombies main quests is the difficulty and puzzle integration within the mode. I definitely believe that it can be argued that during the Blundell and Zelensky days, there were some puzzles that were just batshit annoying and really shouldn't have been implemented inside of COD Zombies at all. But now we are in an era of overcorrection. Call of Duty is a mature game for adults, and yes, I know there are a bunch of stupid unicorn skins in the game, but at the end of the day, it's an 18+ game. But now, the main quest puzzles inside of Zombies are designed for preschool children. And it's not the fact that sometimes puzzles are super simple, as there are now so many small details that streamline the solving process so as to not impede the player. Treyarch has now removed nearly all RNG aspects of their puzzles, as well as removing punishments from failing, where now players can just wait a few moments to try again in the same round, or if there is a round pushing punishment, the puzzles are so simple that even if there are a lot of zombies in the round, it's not really going to affect anything. A good example of this is the periodic table step in Reckoning, where you just see two words and take the first letters and match them to the periodic table to get the code for a door, or in Citadel de Mor, when acquiring the light sword, you just shoot the same code every single game. I find this monotony to be incredibly boring and make each match feel identical from the previous one I just played. And now I'm not advocating for Morse code in every single Easter egg, but my hope is that they bring back some difficulty inside of their quests so that when we finally get into these newer, well-designed boss fights, it feels like we are at risk of losing everything. In closing, I'd like to discuss one last point regarding giving Activision and Treyarch the benefit of the doubt, which largely rests on communication with and toward the community. And to be completely blunt with you all, the communication is absolutely terrible, and it has been terrible for quite some time. And while this recent Zombies developer interview was really well done, there needs to be more of these, more than just one. And I don't know if you remember, but during the Black Ops 6 season, we had a lot of these developer videos about the Zombies maps, and they were decent and they were good, but they ended up petering out as time progressed. And I think this largely has to do with Activision not wanting to spend money properly or wanting a sanitized corporate look for the feel of Call of Duty overall. But before this modern era, Zombies was always treated a little differently, and that helped make it feel distinct and special compared to the rest of the game. The communication from the devs was much more candid and even would fly out Zombies creators for special Zombies events. And while the transparency has certainly gone down in recent times, even during the Cold War Zombies era, we had more common interviews between John Raffis and the dev team, as opposed to now, it's these highly produced videos, segments on the COD Pod, or cookie cutter moments from COD Next that are very safe and corporatized. When you combine all of this with the creator calls and most of the developers on X only really posting and commenting positively when there's a new game or update coming out, it feels so sanitized and safe. And listen, I get having to promote the game and I want all of that to be successful, but the more Activision and Call of Duty add barriers of communication between the people making it and the people buying it, it's not going to feel like we are in it with the developers anymore, and it's just going to be another product on the shelves to consume until the next product is made and it's time for the next moment of consuming.
Don't ask questions, just consume product and then get excited for next product.
I also think it's really important to ask the question of why has it taken this long to get some of these changes we've been asking for? Because even though I'm feeling positive about Treyarch's newfound focus, it does lead me to wonder why it's the case that bringing about rich style and deep world crafting was like pulling teeth, when before, this was all baseline, it was expected. And quite frankly, I don't think Treyarch should be let off the hook for digging the Zombies atmosphere into the ground for the last 5 years. But don't take this the wrong way, I am excited for BO7, I just want some accountability for the people that made the changes that we didn't ask for. Because to be fully transparent, changing the ammo crates from generic military design isn't gameplay evolution, it's an asset flip, and one that we have been begging for since Cold War. And while I think the core art design, story, and main quests can do a lot of heavy lifting if implemented correctly, there are still so many pieces from MP and Warzone that have virtually no redesign or distinction from Zombies. Equipment, score streaks, and armor are all still unchanged for the Zombies mode, and I think that it is unacceptable, and most of all, just boring. Over the years, modern Zombies has made so many small little tweaks in the opposite direction of where Zombies began that it feels like something completely alien in a lot of ways. The communication has become restricted, the gameplay systems are now universal and in menu, and the entire Zombies package has been watered down to cater to everyone instead of designing distinctly for its player base, leading to feelings of an overall sense of stagnation and fatigue. Because on one hand, we are in an era that refuses to make radical changes or make meaningful progress on its systems, yet the step to get here from Black Ops 4 to Cold War was in and of itself somewhat radical, and that is a risk worth commending. But after everything we have gone through as a community, I just can't help but wonder, why are we at a standstill with these systems? Why are we not ushering in meaningful changes? And if any changes do come in, why do they take so long to make? I earnestly don't think we will ever get a straight answer until we see Treyarch in action, which is why I can't give developers the benefit of the doubt at this current point in time. But instead of trying to find the middle ground between the two eras, it seems as if they are continually doubling down on what this modern era is all about. And it seems that Cursed is supposed to be the answer, but there is still so much to learn about how that mode functions. And while it's been amazing to see the multiplayer developers making huge changes to SBMM and creating an open dialogue with its segment of the community, Zombies devs in typical fashion are not doing the same types of things. And even though I am feeling largely positive and somewhat hopeful about Black Ops 7 Zombies at the moment, there are still many things up in the air that Treyarch needs to get right before they can be fully trusted again.